And good evening, one and all, and welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to find out about the programming we have on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net, and we're coming to you tonight on the X Zone Broadcast Network, iHeartRadio, Simul Radio, and Simul TV. If you'd like to send me an email, it's very simple. xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Benjamin Radford, a good friend of the X Zone. And you're probably saying, because you're one of the very new listeners that we have here on the network, thanks to our good people and friends at Simul Radio and Simul TV and Globecast. Well, it's very simple. Benjamin is the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer Science Magazine, a research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, author over 1,000 articles on a wide variety of topics, including urban legends, the paranormal, critical thinking, and media literacy, author of 8 books and growing, board game creator, film director, science-based paranormal investigator, and so as you can see, he's a very busy guy, and he's here tonight to talk to us about one of his very interesting books entitled Mysterious New Mexico. Joining me now is former, gosh, I forget the city.
Buffalo?
Thank you. Former Buffalo resident. It comes with old age, Nick. You've got another 40 years to sample it. Nick Radford. Nick, always great talking to you, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be here.
Hey, Nick, just before we get on to this...
You called me Nick, not Ben.
Sorry, Ben.
That's okay. I know Nick. He's we actually look very similar. We're both bald. I'm slightly more handsome than he is, but I'm Ben.
So I've heard. All right, and sorry about that, Ben. Before we get to the serious stuff, I can prove unequivocally why extraterrestrials do not land on this planet and make themselves known. I've got the answer.
I'm keen to hear it. I've heard various theories, but all of them seem a little dubious to me. But I want to hear yours.
The Senate nomination into Judge Kavanaugh. They're watching it and they're saying, "You've got to be kidding! You want us to go down there? Forget it." Oh.
Yeah, it's a mess. You do have to wonder, if there are intelligent life watching us, they're just shaking whatever they use as heads and just saying, "Why would I want to go down there, write little symbols in crop circles, probe anybody's butts? Why? Let's move on."
But there's another example to prove that there has been reversed engineering done and that the extraterrestrials were in fact here. Where else would we get the tools used for a colonoscopy?
In a perverse, weird sort of logic, I think you're right.
But I digress. Great having you with us. And I was wondering, tell us about New Mexico. Isn't that where you were originally from, or you are now? Or?
Yes, both actually. I was born in New York City, but I spent the first couple of years with my parents traveling around, actually throughout South America and Africa on the back of in the back of a trailer. We ended up in Louisiana for a while, but I spent most of my life here in arid New Mexico, although I did spend an intervening decade up there in Buffalo, and I don't want to disparage Buffalo, but I will say that one of my favorite things about being in Buffalo was going to Canada.
Well, you've got 20 million Canadians clapping right now. 21 with
true.
Me. By the way, for those of you watching us on Simul TV, the background photo is a photo of that beautiful beach that we were at in Lahaina. The sunset in Lahaina, Maui, is fantastic, and this was sent to me by a gentleman I had the pleasure of meeting there. His name is Maurice Lewis, and he is just one of the many staff members at Bubba Gump's there. Fascinating time, great food, great service, and a great photo. Thank you, Maurice, for sending me this great photo. New Mexico is, I would imagine, known as one of the states where very little happens. I mean, besides Roswell.
Well, New Mexico is a curious state. It's relatively poor state. It's pretty large. As you go towards the west, the states get increasingly larger. But it's very arid, and I've had friends of mine who visited New Mexico for the first time, and they're surprised at how much of it actually does look like a Bugs Bunny Roadrunner cartoon. It's there. No, there are many parts of New Mexico that look. Now, to be fair, I want to be crystal clear.
All right.
The state bird is the roadrunner. There is a real bird called roadrunner. It does not beep. I was confused about that because we have roadrunners here. I see them crossing the road every now and then, usually eating lizards. And for the first few years, I growing up here, I was like, why aren't they beeping? And then finally someone took me aside and said they only beep in the cartoons. But if you look at the backgrounds of the Wile E. Coyotes and Roadrunner, many parts of rural New Mexico look a lot like that.
Once again, I would imagine the most famous event to happen in Roswell, besides being the place where the atomic bombs, kind of left in the aircraft and went over to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was the Roswell event of 1947.
Yeah, that is sort of the marquee mystery of New Mexico, of course. And anytime if I'm traveling abroad or something, and I tell people from New Mexico, they either latch on to Breaking Bad, which is filmed here,
oh my gosh,
or of course Roswell. Those are the two things they latch on to, and it is interesting. Roswell is about 4.5 hours south of where I am, but the whole state is sort of saturated in sort of an exoticness. It's always been a land that's drawn artists from Georgia O'Keeffe to gunslingers. We actually have our first the spaceport. We have a spaceport here, a couple hours south of here, where later this year or early next year they're going to be taking space tourists up into orbit. So it really is a land of sort of curiosities, and I think part of it is that here in New Mexico, it's easy to envision it being sort of a rural Wild West area. And so, if I tell you that a UFO crashed somewhere, in rural New Mexico, I don't know, Mesa in the desert or something, it's more plausible than if I tell you it crashed, outside of Atlanta or Boston or something.
That's because there are no witnesses in New Mexico where there'd be multiple witnesses anywhere else.
Well, that's a big part of it.
Another thing that we can thank our extraterrestrial brothers for is that thanks to ET, giving somebody the finger is now socially acceptable.
That's right. I hadn't thought about that, but thanks to our space brothers, we can now do that.
That's right. Have you been to Roswell? I'm sure you have.
I have. I've been there 2 or 3 times. To be honest with you, there's not a lot there besides the UFO tourism. I mean, it's a nice enough town.
Yeah.
If you're on your way to, Western Texas, which I guess some people might be, it's a nice stopover. But I mean, the main reason to go to Roswell, that really pretty much anybody outside goes to Roswell, is for the UFO festival. And I was there twice, most recently about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was fascinating. I of course, given what I do, research investigations and weird things, I had to go sooner or later. And it was just, it was this amalgam of, bizarre new age stuff and, people walking around with, alien costumes on, and this hodgepodge of it wasn't just aliens. It was, basically a kitchen sink of new age stuff. So you had psychics and crop circles, and I met a guy named Lloyd Pye who died a year or two back.
Oh my gosh, yeah, Lloyd, with Star Child.
Exactly, the Star Child skull,
yeah.
And he and I talked about that, and it was kind of interesting because he recognized me, and I as you know, I've done a fair amount of media and TV
Sure.
and stuff, and every now and then when I'm going to interview somebody, I don't always want to necessarily announce who I'm not hiding who I am, but I sometimes get more information if they don't see me as the skeptic. But he recognized me, and he said, "Oh, come on over, I'll show you the thing." So he was actually a very nice guy. Some of the answers when I asked him about why he was so certain that his skull was of alien origin were a bit sketchy, but he was a nice enough guy.
You and I have to take our break. Please stand by. Our good friend Benjamin Radford is my guest this hour, Exonation. And if you'd like to find out more about Benjamin, www.benjaminradford.com. This is the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, coming to you from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. No, the graphic that we're using tonight is not the regular studio one we use. This is from Lahaina, Hawaii, on the island of Maui, where right now it's 93 degrees, and it is 6 hours earlier than it is here in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. So right over there, it's about 1:24 in the afternoon. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Benjamin Radford is my guest for this hour, www.benjaminradford.com. We were talking about Lloyd Pye before we went to the break, and when I first started doing this show going back to oh my gosh, let's see, we've been on air for about 1990, 1991. Do you know what he was talking about back then?
I don't actually.
Bigfoot.
I did not know that. Interesting. All
yeah,
right.
He was talking about Bigfoot, and he actually had the lineage of Bigfoot going back to the Russian czars, and that the Russian coal miners would use Bigfoot as a laborer, and at night the miners would have their way with the female members of the Bigfoot race.
That does not entirely shock me, but I didn't know that. That's fascinating. It all kind of fits. I mean, he was a very excitable guy.
Yes.
And I can totally see him being sort of latching on to some wild idea and just pursuing it. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. So my standard joke was, the difference between a dog and a fox is 7 Jack Daniels, but now it's the difference between a dog and a Sasquatch, 7 Jack Daniels.
Well, there you go. And of course, as you know, one of, if not the most famous story of some, shall we say, dalliances with Sasquatch was up in BC with Albert Osman, a Canadian prospector, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
But what was he prospecting for?
some hot big feet, I guess.
Yeah, it can be kind of cold up here in Canada, as you well know. But it's okay now. Our Prime Minister saw it fit to legalize marijuana. So I'm sure that's going to change things.
Well, I'll swap you anytime. If you want to send Justin down here, I'll trade you at the drop of a hat.
You know what? If I could, I would. If I could, I would. Just for you.
We'll even take Belinda Stronach at this point. I mean, whoever you got out there, just send somebody over.
No. Wait a sec. Hold on. You've got William Shatner, and you've got all the Canadian actors down there. Now you want our Prime Minister? Go ahead.
Send Geddy Lee down here. I'd love to have him run things around here for a while.
Yeah, well, he's a great singer. Guns N' Roses. Yeah. Okay, why did you write the book on the mysteries of New Mexico when you've written, you've gone all over the world, you've been across the United States several times? Why mysterious New Mexico? What do you know that the rest of us don't know?
That's actually a good question. Part of it was that I had previously written a book for UNM Press, one of my publishers, University of New Mexico Press, and I did one, as you know, on the Chupacabra.
Yeah.
And that took a couple years, and it was a pretty in-depth investigation. It was a good investigative piece there, and my editor there, a guy named Clark, was talking to me, and he said, "Well, what do you have next?" And I said, "Well, I'm always being asked to do some investigation. Maybe it's genies or UFOs or monsters or whatever else." And And he said, well, and I talked to him, about Loch Ness and different stuff I'd done. And he said, well, what about something, here in your own backyard? And I hadn't really thought about it. It's one of those things where, it's when you live in a place, it just, everything sort of just becomes background.
Exactly.
So sometimes it takes a friend or a stranger coming here to sort of point out the things that you walk by every day. And he said, yeah, there's all sorts of weird things. I said, yeah, I don't want to do Roswell. Roswell's been done to death. He said, no, there, he just said, just spend some time looking around. And sure enough, he was right. And so I realized that there's so many mysteries and there's so much high strangeness here in my own home state that was literally in my backyard. And I said, yeah, let me turn some of my investigations into a book. And I had actually done several of the investigations beforehand. I just hadn't sort of had the thought to sort of combine them into a book specifically about mysteries, miracles, and myths and legends in New Mexico. So that's what I did.
What was the most mysterious event that you discovered that shocked even you?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have to say there's a couple that I really deal with in the book. One of the most mysterious ones that I was surprised at how it turned out was I was asked to look into miracle healings. And I investigate miracles on occasion if it's something that's sort of within my bailiwick. I was actually on a guest on a TV show called Miracle Detectives a couple years back. It was on Oprah's network, which
Good show.
I think
It was a good
is
show.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty good. I don't know. I think Oprah Network is long gone, but I was on there once or twice, and I got an email out of the blue from somebody who had seen me on that TV show, and said, I was healed by miracle dirt. Can you investigate? And
Miracle
I said, okay. And so I looked into it. And as it turns out, there is a church up in northern New Mexico, about an hour and a half north of here.
Uh-huh.
And it is said to have, it's called the Chimayo. And it's said to have, it's a beautiful old church. It's, one of the oldest certainly in the Southwest.
Right.
Old adobe, just, gorgeous old place. And there's one particular room that has a hole in the floor, and it's basically sand and dirt underneath it. And the story is, and I'd occasionally heard this, just growing up, people talk about the pilgrimages there.
Yes,
so once
okay.
a year they have, for Easter and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't really paid much attention to the miraculous healings. It was just, I'd heard about it, but it didn't really enter my radar as something that I could or should research. But in this case, I had somebody who had contacted me of their own volition saying, I was cured by this miracle dirt. Can you validate this? So it's kind of a long story. I won't go to the whole thing. It's one of the chapters in the book, but it was fascinating. So I met the guy, a guy named Armando, and his story just briefly was that he had been severely burned. He just come home from military service. It was here in New Mexico, and there was a flash fire, and somebody had knocked over some oil, and just basically, or actually it was fumes, and it just exploded up. And he was, according to his story, he was badly burned, third-degree burns over most of his body. And he said that he'd gotten bandaged up and the whole thing, and that he had gone. And this all happened. I'm forgetting the date. It was in the 50s, I believe. And he had been taken and insisted on going to the church because he was a very devout Catholic, where he had rubbed this dirt on his wounds. And he said that within a few days he was almost entirely healed. And so that was an interesting case. I didn't really know what to do with it, and I ended up consulting with medical doctors and researching as much as I could what actually happened to him and trying to piece it back together. Because again, by the time I had heard the story, it was decades old, and so I had to try and I met with him and his wife, and they didn't have any records to go back that far, and so it was a fascinating case.
What did the medical professionals say about the possibility of this dirt having any effect on his wounds?
Well, there were a couple aspects to it. Well, the first one was that I soon realized, or I discovered that and I don't think I'm giving away any secrets here, but they actually truck in sand from elsewhere. So it's not as if the dirt miraculously reappears after people take it out. They in fact, if you go behind the church, there's a huge pile of sand where they bring it in and put it back in the hole, and then the pilgrims take it out. And so I did some research into, what's the possibility that this dirt actually has miraculous healings. And there were a couple answers. One of them is that, frankly, again, given that it's actually dirt that's trucked in from elsewhere and then placed there and then taken out by the devout,
right?
It's mostly sand, and there's not much there. I mean, there is some clay. There's calcium carbonate that's some people might use to for upset stomach, things like that. It's one of the ingredients in Pepto-Bismol, for example. But in terms of actually putting it on a topical wound, there really wasn't much validity to that. And another interesting aspect is that if you go to the church, there's rows and rows of crutches, and so the implication is that people have not only been healed of for example bad burns,
right,
but they've suddenly been able to walk again. So it was interesting. So I one of the first things was to try and piece together how bad was the original burn. And could it have been, was it actually a third degree burn, or was it like a first degree burn? In which case, as it turned out, again, I don't want to spoil the ending of the story, but as it turned out, what he described was much more likely to be what's called a flash fire, which can be certainly very, very painful, but it's not. It doesn't have. It's basically if you combust fumes.
Right.
So he wasn't doused in gasoline; it was fumes that exploded. And so piecing back together, it turned out that almost certainly his original wounds and his burns were not as bad as he remembered. And
Nick, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Ben, stand by. You and I have to take a break. Exonation Benjamin Radford is our special guest. And I've heard of men going to gentlemen clubs and getting flash burns as well from sitting too close to the brass pole. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Benjamin Radford's our special guest, and if you'd like to contact Benjamin or if you would like to buy any of his books, visit his great website. It's www.benjaminradford.com. Ben, in Chapter 3, you investigated the mysterious crystal skulls. Now, besides talking about Lloyd's Pie, Star Child, the only crystal skull that I'm aware of is the Mitchell Hedges skull.
Yes.
What do you know about that skull and the other skulls? What significance do they play in society, if any, besides being very ornamental door stoppers?
Well, they are beautiful pieces, I have to say. Exactly as you pointed out, the most famous crystal skull in the world is the one by Mitchell Hedges, the one owned by Mitchell Hedges. I think the daughter Anna died a few years back, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And I think she lived in Canada.
She did, Kitchener.
That's right. That's right. I'm glad my memory isn't failing me. But yeah, so it was interesting. So I've always been fascinated by crystal skulls, and because they're just inherently amazing objects, right? I mean, whatever you may think of their reputed New Age origins. I mean, some people believe that they come from Atlantis. Some people believe they have certain powers and they can heal. And the Mitchell Hedges skull that you mentioned, that was said to have the power to kill.
Well, wasn't there a big controversy about it? Wasn't it actually the Bernie Smith skull that Mitchell Hedges actually acquired somehow?
Yeah, there's a whole we could do a whole episode just on that. It's a
Yeah.
fascinating history, but yeah, basically, it's the Mitchell Hedges skull was supposed to have been found by F.A. Mike Mitchell Hedges, who was sort of a British raconteur, explorer, man about town, um, back in the 50s.
You see, Exxon Nations, did you see how elegantly our guest described Mitchell Hedges? Like, I just say he was a bloody idiot. But
Well, he's dead, so we can say words like fraud, con man. But this is a Canadian podcast, so I'm trying to be polite.
this is a radio show, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh,
cast aspersions.
ouch.
This is a Canadian show, so, but no, so the story goes, and it is it's a fascinating, rich story.
Yeah,
So
it
you've
is.
got you've got this explorer who's talking about how he came back from Belize. At the time it was British Honduras.
Yeah.
And he tells this very ornate story. I think one of his books was called Danger My Ally, which is a book that I want to rip off that title. That is an awesome title. If nothing else, the man can title a book.
Did you ever read the sequel?
I don't know that I did.
It was called Danger My Ass.
Let's go. Yeah, you're on a roll tonight. That. Okay, pull them together. Yeah, so he tells this story about going to this. He's in the lost ruins of Lubantun, in the Belizean jungle, and I've been to Belize several times
Yes.
in the jungle region, not too far from there actually. And there are actual ruins there, and he apparently did spend some time there, and he tells the story of how actually he told a couple different stories. I'll just give you one quick one. He says that he was there with his daughter Anna, who at the time I think was 8 or 10 or something, accompanying her amazingly adventurous non-con man father into the jungles there. And
Wait a sec, Ben. I thought you said she went with Mitchell Hedges.
Yes, F.A. Mike Mitchell Hedges, her non-con man father.
Oh, that's what threw me off the non part. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Didn't mean to throw you off there.
Phew.
So they told, again, they told several different stories, as you know. One of them was that they were there, and she was being a mischievous little girl. I think it was actually her birthday, according to one of the stories, and she saw a glimmer of light somewhere deep inside the cavernous thing, and they lowered her down inch by inch in a very suitably melodramatic style, reminiscent of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Oh, you're killing me. You're killing me.
I'm telling you the story. So she like fought away rats, and she killed a dragon or something. I don't remember exactly what I don't know. You slayed a dragon, ogres,
jeez.
chupacabras. I don't. Anyway, the point is that after all this daring do, she grasped this skull, again, something straight out of a Spielberg film, and was hoisted up, and she held this crystal skull aloft. And the natives, who you can imagine were, in her telling, were sort of so reverential, they fell to their feet. This, wearing probably grass skirts or something, and just, professed their lives to this woman.
Do you know why they fell to their feet? Because they thought the other guy dropped her, and they were happy to see her alive.
Exactly. So they tell this story, and this is a story that Mitchell Hedges told, and then Anna later on told. And again, they told several contradictory stories about how exactly they found this thing. But the true story is that it was basically bought from a collector. And then it was pawned, and then Anna bought it back from the guy, and then made up this whole story about how she had found it herself in this lost ruins in Belize. But meanwhile, it turned into this huge circus because it is an amazing piece of work.
It is.
And there's it's just a cool thing, but everybody began talking about how it had all these powers. People would pay money to be in the same room with this skull, believing that it increased their psychic abilities, and they would have visions and all these sorts of things. And that's one of several one of several crystal skulls that I talk about in the chapter.
Now, I understand, and I authenticated this fact with a number of people that the initials Mitchell Hedges used to put behind his name were actually because he had bought a membership to the London Zoological Society.
I think I heard that.
Yeah. But then again, if it wasn't for Anna Mitchell Hedges and her dad and the story of the finding of the crystal skull, many gypsies would be out of work because then they'd have no crystal balls.
That's right. That's right. And it takes balls to make a joke like that.
Certainly does.
Crystal ones.
Boom, boom. You see, we can have fun on this show too, like Howard Stern, without getting obnoxious.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What's that, Craig? You're fired. Okay. I remember having somebody on the show when I was at CKTB who had something to do with Anna Mitchell Hedges. They lived in Port Colborne, Ontario. They owned a dive shop for diving, industrial commercial diving into Lake Erie. And I can't for the life of me remember what the connection was. But I'll go through my files, and I remember getting excited because I was going to have somebody on about the Mitchell Hedges. About the crystal skull, Mitchell Hedge, and the rest of it. And then I started doing my research into it, and I kind of felt silly. Like, oh no.
Well, yeah, a lot of people bought into it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, in my chapter, I talk about, that's only one of several crystal skulls. There's actually another crystal skull that has a connection to here in New Mexico, and it's kind of a long story. I won't go into it.
Sure, let's do that on the other side of the break. But I must tell you, the artwork that went into the creation of these crystal skulls is amazing, considering, to the best of my knowledge, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, they haven't been able to find any tooling evidence.
Well, they using microscope, they actually did find some tooling ones on the more recent ones.
But I mean, on the Mitchell Hedges skull.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not remembering off the top of my head if the tooling marks. I know that on several of the crystal skulls they absolutely did find tooling marks. I don't remember if that was the case with Mitchell Hedges.
But isn't Mitchell Hedges' skull the only one that has the detachable or removable bottom jaw?
I believe so. Yeah. There's another one at the British Museum, and I saw at the British Museum. There's a photograph of it in the book. And as I recall, that's all one piece. So that is one of the things that's unique about the Mitchell Hedges skull is that it is two separate pieces.
Do we know anything about its actual origin, not the origin that Mitchell Hedges spun about it?
Well, in the case of the Mitchell Hedges skull, it was I'm forgetting the exact name, but it was bought by a collector. In fact, they actually found the receipt for the skull, basically disproving that she'd found it in suitably cinematic form. But many of the similar skulls were being made in Germany and also in South America, sometimes from South American quartz, often from Brazil. So we know that there actually was a cottage industry making these crystal skulls in the 1800s, late 1800s.
Wow. Unbelievable. Benjamin Radford, please stand by. You and I have to take our final break for this hour. Exonation. Benjamin Radford is our guest this hour. He's a real cool guy, even though he's from Buffalo. That's why he's now in New Mexico. Hey, listen, I'm sorry. I've got a lot of great friends in Buffalo. Besides, if it wasn't for Buffalo, there'd be no buffalo wings, and we all love them, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin Radford, www.benjaminradford.com, and Benjamin and I will be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. People have a fascination with glass and crystals. My grandmother, God bless her soul, used to collect glass paperweights. And I remember as a child spending hours just looking at them in wonderment, saying, what the hell does anybody do with this stuff?
Hold down paper, I guess.
Exactly. We'll be back on the other side of this break This is the X Zone. Don't go away. Benjamin Radford is my guest this hour, X Zone Nation, www.benjaminradford. He is the deputy editor of Skeptical Inquirer magazine. It's a science magazine, a research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquirer, author of over 1,000 articles on a wide variety of topics, including urban legends, the paranormal, critical thinking, and media literacy, author of 8 books and counting, board game...
10 books.
10... Wow.
I cranked out 2 of them since the last break.
My God, you're good. What can I say? A board game creator, film director, science-based paranormal, and all-around nice guy. Once again, his website is benjaminradford.com. And Benjamin, as I said during the break, always look forward to having you on. Great talking to you, and congratulations on all the great things that you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's I always enjoy being on your show. It's just get a chance to just talk and just chat about fun stuff, and sometimes it's very academic, sometimes it's a little lighter. It's great. I always enjoy listening to conversations between 2 people who are talking about interesting things, and so or at least you are. I'm not sure about myself, but you are.
Oh, we have a good time. That's what I believe radio should be like. You should have a good time. You don't need to have this close set format.
Right.
And when we're getting new guests on who have never done an interview, I say, just imagine meeting a friend at a coffee shop, sitting down, having a coffee, discussing something. Mm-hmm. And that's what works for most people. Everybody knows about the Roswell crash, who has any interest in UFOs whatsoever. But what about, I've heard of a crash at Aztec?
Yes.
Tell us about that, Nick.
Yeah, Aztec was, as I mentioned, with when people think UFOs in New Mexico, they go right to Roswell. It's by far the best known crash anywhere in the world, of course, and certainly New Mexico. But many few people have heard about the Aztec crash, even though in many ways it's even more interesting, if you can believe it. And Aztec is a tiny little town up by the Four Corners area, and that's in the sort of northwest area where 4 different states meet in sort of a little crosshair. It's sort of a cute little thing they have there. And there's a small little town of Aztec, New Mexico. And the story goes, it's sort of a long story. I'll sort of try and summarize. But basically, the story goes that in 1948, and again, this is a year after the Roswell crash, and a year after, of course, Kenneth Arnold, who the first person to have a high-profile nationwide sighting of different things that were later inaccurately described as flying saucers. That was the first time that flying saucers entered the public lexicon. It was actually there was a mistake by the journalist. He was actually describing how they moved, not what they looked like. But so anyway, this is right around that same era, and the story goes that that there was a extraterrestrial craft was coming through the state, and there were radar sites that tracked it, and something apparently happened to it. Maybe it hit a tree or ran out of gas. I don't really know what they do, but it crashed. And this was discovered soon. And immediately, of course, the government came in. So there were the world's top scientists. If you picture the end of in Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they say, top men. So the top men showed up, along with soldiers and police officers and everything. And they found this saucer that was 99.99 feet in diameter. Not 100 feet. That's a whole different saucer. This one was 99.99. And they were circling this thing, and apparently one of the windows was broken out. And for 2 days they couldn't figure out how to get into it. And they had a long stick that apparently they were poking at the control panel, and they hit a button or something, and the latch popped open. And inside were were a bunch of aliens, and there were 16 bodies, and they were described as being very human-like, but between 3 and 3.5 feet tall, and they were clothed in this sort of mysterious old type of clothing, but it was indestructible. So it was this strange metallic thing that was, couldn't be burned or torn or anything. And another thing that was noted was the aliens all had perfect teeth.
Okay, so they know a good dentist.
on Venus, apparently.
Venus.
Yes, it was. It was believed by somebody there that because the saucer was 99.99 feet in diameter, that somehow indicated that it was a Venusian origin.
Well, wasn't George Adamski into the Venusians?
He was, yeah. Adamski was all about that, and of course he made his series of photographs, which are certainly these days not looked upon too favorably. But Adamski, and yeah, this is around the era when these things were very much in the popular consciousness. Anyway, so again, it's sort of it's a long story, but basically what happened was that the story came to light because of basically two people. One of them was a guy named Silas Newton, and Silas Newton was an oil man, and he was sort of he spent a lot of time in the oil fields and trying to get investors to do things, and he came across a story and he pitched it to a guy named Frank Scully. And Frank Scully was a reporter in Hollywood, and he wrote for Variety. In fact, Scully is where Chris Carter got the name for the X-Files. That was from Frank Scully. And Newton had known Scully for a while, and Scully heard the story of this amazing crashed flying saucer out in this tiny little town outside of in Aztec. And he wanted to know more about it, and so Newton said, "Okay, well, I'll tell you about it, but I can't give you any solid evidence because, of course, it's a cover-up. Because as soon as the Men in Black came in, and they took it all. They told everybody to shut up. But he said, I can let you speak to an anonymous scientist who was there."
Da 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 dum.
Dun, 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 exactly. And this anonymous scientist was called Dr. G. And Dr. G met with Frank Scully and was incredibly impressed. And Dr. G told about how he was one of the world's top scientists, and he had more degrees than a thermometer. And he was he'd been involved in top secret things, and he was called to the crash site because of his expertise. And he was the person that actually handled and saw the dead alien bodies and the crash saucer and this and that. And Scully loved the story. He's like, oh my God, this is amazing. So he began writing articles for Variety, and he later wrote a book that was very popular and influential. Basically, with his anonymous source, Dr. G, and no real evidence. But what was odd about it was that Dr. G and Silas Newton, they weren't really that interested in aliens. They were like, oh, it's not really that interesting. They were more interested in getting investors.
All right, Craig. Yeah, we caught it. All right, there. My producer thought he'd be smart on throwing the X-Files theme.
So the idea was that, and this actually surprised Scully, because he's like, well, you're telling me about this, you saw these crashed alien bodies and stuff, and he's like, yeah, that's real. What we really want to do is, like, here's the thing. So Dr. G talked about how he had taken some of the technology from the flying saucer and put it into something called a doodlebug. Apparently this seemed plausible in 1948, and so Newton and Dr. G were getting investors to invest in these devices, which, according to Newton and Dr. G, could detect oil, because again, Silas Newton's an oil man. It could also detect water, and it could also diagnose medical problems.
Wow.
I know, right? It slices, it dices. There's pretty much nothing this little device couldn't do because of the recovered alien technology. And so, based upon this, Newton and Dr. G went around telling people that they had this device, and it was something about the size of a shoebox, and it had little dials and knobs on it. And they said, okay, now this is made from Venusian technology, and it can always detect oil, better than anything else.
Wow.
And we can find these sorts of things. Just give us money, we'll invest in it. But they said, you can look at it, but don't open it.
Yeah, it sounds like the that truth-o-meter that they use at the Church of Scientology.
It was very much like
Yeah.
the e-meters, yes. But and in this case, they said, okay, but you can't open it because the technology is so secret that there's explosives in it. And if you open the latch, it will explode. And we're like, okay.
Uh-huh.
So they paid, so many investors paid a bunch of money to Silas Newton and Dr. G, who was later determined to be a guy named Jabauer, to invest in this alien technology that would help them become rich by finding oil out in the Southwest. So this eventually came to the attention of a journalist by name J.P. Kahn, Kahn, whose skepticism was, shall we say, piqued by this story. And I'll cut to the chase. J.P. Kahn investigated for the San Francisco Chronicle and eventually exposed both Jabauer and Silas Newton as the con men that they obviously were, and they ended up being convicted of fraud.
Unbelievable. And it's been a great hour with you, Ben, as it always is. Take care of my friend. Continued success, and I can't wait till the next time you and I chat here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studio. Until then, be well, be safe, and be happy. All right, X Zone, I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you'd like to find out more about our guest this hour, Benjamin Radford, visit his website at www.benjaminradford.com. And for one of the best publications out on the market today, just go into your Google search engine and type in Skeptical Inquirer. We'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.